Welcome to Alignment, using your values to invest in social change, brought to you by Oikocredit US. We're proud to bring you this sixth in our series of interviews with experts in the field of values-based investing. I'm Matt Eldridge, CEO of Oikocredit US. Today, we're delighted to have as our special guest, Sister Corinne Florek, who's been called the godmother of CDFIs, or Community Development Financial Institutions. For those of you unfamiliar with CDFIs, they provide new sources of capital to neighborhoods that lack access to financing. How has Sister Corinne's Catholic faith guided her work to empower others by investing in low-income communities? Stay tuned to find out. Before we introduce Sister Corinne, just a quick word about who we are. Oikocredit US is the nonprofit US affiliate of Oiko Credit International, a 46-year-old global cooperative that works to improve living conditions in low-income countries. Oiko Credit does so by investing in microfinance and small and medium-sized enterprises in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Our job here at Oiko Credit US is to raise awareness and financial support in North America for these efforts. We're so happy to speak today with Sister Corinne, who is the portfolio manager for the Adrian Dominican Sisters Community Investment Program. She has worked in the field of community economic development as a manager, educator, consultant, financial administrator, and strategic planner. Whether administering a 50-member craft cooperative in Appalachia, a small business loan fund for low-income women in San Francisco, or international loan funds, Sister Corinne has focused on using capital innovatively to empower low-income people. She received an MBA from Notre Dame and previously held roles at the Mercy Partnership Fund and the Religious Communities Impact Fund. Sister Corinne, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's a delight to be here.
It's a delight to have you on the program. So appreciate it. Sister Corinne, we first connected 2 years ago, shortly after I started at Oikocredit US, when you were departing the Religious Communities Investment Fund. I don't think I realized at the time that you had been a former board member of our predecessor organization, Oikocredit USA. What first drew you to Oikocredit, and where do you see the greatest opportunity for Oikocredit to make a difference in the world?
Well, Matt, our congregation first invested in 1978. So that was really early in terms of beginning in the U.S. to get investors. And the only way to invest was equity. And that was unusual for us, but we did it. And what I like and why I've promoted Oiko Credit to many other people is because, number one, it's a cooperative. And I really want to promote cooperatives as a way of our economy operating. I find that I would love to have our whole economy worldwide be cooperative. So I do what I can to promote cooperatives around the world. Secondly, when we first invested, this was about the only international opportunity that was available. You didn't have all these other funds. And so I want to continue to promote Oiko because of its long history, as well as what it's doing, both for cooperatives and many other models. But Oiko Credit has a spread in terms of Africa, Latin America, Asia, much more so than some other of the current international funds. And lastly, it's really interesting to me that it's only equity. In many other when I was on the board in the U.S., we were able to get a lot of loan dollars for Oiko Credit from the U.S., and we had to liquidate that fund. And I was always sorry about that because I understand the importance of the equity, and we're all in this as shareholders. But, in the U.S., it's so complicated. You get into all these laws, and it was such a great way to get people involved. So I was sorry that we had to let that structure go.
Thanks, Sister Corinne. And we certainly hope we can find some ways to make it easier for people in the U.S. to invest in impact through organizations like Oiko Credit. It's been called the godmother of CDFIs, or Community Development Finance Institutions. Before I ask you about that, can you first help us understand what exactly CDFIs are? When I go to Wikipedia, I see a definition that it's a CDFI is a financial institution that provides credit and financial services to underserved markets and populations, mainly in the US, but also in the UK. And there are many flavors. There are community development banks, community development credit unions, community development loan funds, and so forth. That's a lot to digest. Can you help us understand what CDFIs are in plain English?
In plain English, it's local people wanting to invest locally in neighborhoods that didn't have access to capital. And you know, the history of it, I was looking up the history, and the first one that I could find was 1974. And it was started as it was the Fund for an Open Society in Philadelphia, and it was in response to the Civil Rights Movement to provide access for capital in neighborhoods for people of color. Now, this is people coming together and then attracting philanthropists and others who want to enable people in those neighborhoods to have access to capital, realizing that that is a way of getting home ownership and so many other benefits, you know, small business, etc. Chuck Mathai in 1979 started the Institute for Community Economics Loan Fund, and he was the one who really promulgated the movement. And I like to still think of it as a movement, because to me the point of these is to be locally based and to help local people invest in their communities, but also attract capital from other places to invest in these communities. Because, you know, one of the things you find with credit unions, and the reason why I invest in community development credit unions, is because if you're dealing with a low-income population, the key word is low income. They don't have a lot of money to save. They need banking services, but they don't have a lot of money to save. And for the credit union to make loans, where does that money come from if they can't get it from the savings of the members? So organizations like myself can make a non-member deposit. That gives them money to make loans. So to work with these community organizations, to me, that's what CDFIs are community. It's about community. It's about organizations in the community who deal with the needs of the people. And there are a lot of historic references. You know, the first community development credit unions were in the 1900s. Local people starting organizations to help themselves. And, you know, you can now invest in a whole variety of CDFIs, but my main criteria is, are they really connected to the people in their local communities and know what those people are saying they need and providing it? And that's going to create, that means services as well as loans. A lot of times this is not about transactions, this is about relationships and helping people understand how they can use that money and use it well, and what it might take to receive that money. But it's all about building community. It's all about relationships. And so some of us as investors may not be directly related to the people, but through the staff we have that relationship. So for me, that's the beginning. Too many people are looking at CDFIs as, oh, I can make this return or this. It's about community. It's about realizing that we are all in this together. You know, that's what climate change is telling us. We're all in this together. Guess what? And that's what, to me, that was the beginning of community investing. And a lot of CDFIs, their first investors were Catholic women religious. If you look at South Shore Bank, which was the first bank, if you look at Southern Bank Corps, women religious were among the first investors. You look at some of the original CDFIs, New Hampshire, I can go into a whole list. Women religious were the first because we were committed to community. And we were committed to economic empowerment in that community. It wasn't about us getting return. It was about that community and its needs.
Got it. Well, and that's so interesting, too, to hear that some of the earliest community development credit unions started in the early 1900s. CDFIs were, in their current name, established by an act of Congress in 1994. But, you know, as you spoke about, there's a longer history before that, and you yourself were engaged in financing for low-income neighborhoods and communities as far back as the 70s for you personally. Shortly after you joined the Adrian Dominican Sisters, you earned your MBA at Notre Dame in 1980. What inspired you to find ways to channel capital into impact?
Well, I have to admit, it was, I was one of the younger nuns, and it was really the work of our other sisters who were involved in social justice that taught me um, how to view this from the lens of justice. And it was their research and their work through shareholder resolutions, etc. We started that work in 1975, and that was a result of we were beginning to look at we needed to have retirement savings for our sisters. But we had sisters who were very committed to justice work. The riots had happened, the civil rights movement, etc. And, you read Catholic social teaching, and you've got to be involved in justice. I mean, it's just a constituent of the gospel. So when we realized we had to create funds for our retirement, there was also this push to, wait a minute, it's also got to be done in a way that promotes justice. So we got involved in shareholder resolutions and that kind of thing. And then in 78 is when they began saying, this is long-term strategy. And to this day, sisters are still very active in shareholder resolutions and working with corporations to make them better corporate citizens. But we wanted something that had more immediate impact to deal with these communities that were suffering. And that's when we had our first loans. One of the first was to South Shore Bank. When I joined after I graduated from Notre Dame, then I was on the committee. And, I learned a lot, both because when I was at Notre Dame, I studied cooperatives. That's where I was first introduced to cooperatives. And so I studied cooperatives, and I studied these different communities, and then I started working in a community in Appalachia. So I saw it from the ground up and became more and more committed. So I could use my financial skills, but in a way, in those days, business schools didn't teach you about small business. It was all corporate. So I kind of had to learn by doing. I could take some of those business skills, but I really had to learn by doing. And I've stayed committed to it ever since.
You spoke about justice and social justice as being a driver and part of the motivation for why many people, including yourself, have looked at finding ways to use capital to achieve positive impact in low-income communities. We recently released a report on the U.S. impact investing market, which is on our website and in the YouTube description for this webinar. And what we found is that demand for impact investing has grown exponentially over the past decade. And there's been an explosion of so-called environment, social, and governance, or ESG funds. And some of those are now available to individuals through exchange-traded funds known as ETFs. How have you seen interest in impact investing or community development finance evolve in Catholic communities over the past 10 years? How has that been changing?
Well, I can't speak specifically to Catholic because this is an ecumenical movement. And even some of those early efforts were Episcopalians, Protestants, ICCR, the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, was really started by many of those denominations, and we joined them. So for me, it's been an ecumenical movement the whole time. So I can't speak just to the Catholic community, but I can speak to the faith community. And I can say, we started by using the power we had as shareholders to try to push corporations for more just policies in a variety of ways. I was involved in those, the South African anti-apartheid movement was a great outpouring of support and people using their proxies, their voting power as shareholders to get involved, etc. But even before that, we were involved because of nuclear power and the issues of the Cold War and nuclear power. And I remember myself going to a couple corporations to talk about not developing nuclear weapons. And of course we couldn't stop them, but we could raise the issue. And we could talk to other shareholders about it, and we could say, don't invest in these companies. Then, and of course they relied on government. I mean, it's a complex issue. But that beginning, and then the beginning of doing community development, and being willing to invest in communities in a way that was empowering for them. That's the whole point of it. Now, I get a little concerned with, oh my God, all these billions of dollars and Wall Street. Along the way, Wall Street keeps co-opting us. As soon as they find that this is a market niche, they take it over and they make it something that drives me crazy because they make it all about return. And I'm like, what about people? What about the environment? Wait a minute, this is not about return. And I say to people over and over again, if you have money to invest, you have already done well in this world. You are already better off than most people in this world. Now it's time for you to give back. That was even Chuck Mathai's pitch when he was trying to get people to invest in the first loan funds. He went to people of wealth and said, you have a moral responsibility to give back to this community. You've already done well. It's time for you to give back, to be socially responsible. And that's why a lot of faith-based investors were involved, because they got that value. I don't care what faith you are, all of our scriptures say the same thing. Love your neighbor. Love God and your neighbor as yourself. And we use money in a way that does not show love of neighbor, does not point to that, especially when you want return, when you're trying to help people who have nothing. Oh, give me a break. So now with all this new ESG, etc., I'm beginning to say to people, if you own shares, vote your proxy. You have a power as a shareholder to change corporations, and so few people are using it. And even, and there are organizations now that will vote your proxies for you. I've had people say to me, I don't understand all the issues. I'm like, abstain. At least then management cannot think you agree with them. If you abstain, if enough people abstained on an issue because they couldn't understand it, I'll bet you the corporations will find a way to get you to understand it so that then you know how to vote on it. But why do we have the boards the way we do? Why do we have compensation? Do you know compensation is 1,300+% more than the average worker? This is outrageous. This is unconscionable. This is unjust. And shareholders would have the power to change that if you would vote your proxy and not vote for these compensation packages. So anyway, that's one of my soapboxes.
No,
But when you talk about this, there's social screening, there's advocacy, there's voting your proxies. This is just your regular portfolio of investments. Then I say to people, take a penny on a dollar. I'm not saying take all those investments. You need them for retirement. We have them. But take a penny on a dollar and invest it in these community development organizations. And don't expect to make big bucks because you've already done that. Invest in these organizations. They've never lost investor money. It's not speculative. It's not risky. And you create a new economy for people that don't have access that you do. So, this is not, I'm not asking you to give it away. You will get it back. You won't get the same return, but you will get it back.
Right. And that's what seems to make this really fundamentally different from how many other organizations work or different business models where they're raising philanthropic capital to make outright grants or donations. What you're talking about is with community development finance is actually investments, capital that provided things go as planned or hope that folks will get back. So it's a way to have an impact.
Well, and I say to people, I invested in community development financial institutions, the loan funds, when they had no track record, they had no equity, they had no loan loss reserves, and I haven't lost a penny. And if you invest today, they have a track record, they have the reserves, loan loss reserves, they have equity, you will not lose money. This is not risky speculative investing. I did it as a speculator, if you want to call it that, way back when they had none of that. So come on, I created a platform for you. Get on the boat. Get on board here. And now there's a whole new realm of what's called ESG investing, where you've got management consultants and all these people. This is the Wall Street, they found a new niche, right? And it's interesting because the SEC is even getting, corporations are going to have to start reporting on environmental impacts, things we've been pushing them to do, minority rights, environmental impacts, workers' dignity, etc. So this is now becoming a bigger movement. So as a shareholder, you've got a lot more ways to be engaged and to push this than ever before. And now with this now Wall Street's impact investing, I say to people, every investment you make has impact. That word is so ubiquitous. Give me a break, right? But this is Wall Street. So if you want to do social good and social return, that seems to be big on the environment. There's lots of environment, there's lots of solar, there's lots of agriculture. This is not helping the poor. This is new, speculative, it'll be better for the environment. So go for it. I'm not saying don't do that. But also look at these community development investments where you are really helping the grassroots people. I often say I like mucking around in the grassroots. That's where I started. That's the people I know. That's why you have the institutions you have now, because we started in the grassroots. We have to keep funding grassroots projects. You know, if you think about how nature works, you get these huge trees, but they start from little acorns. And those trees have to keep producing acorns so more trees will grow. You have to stay with soil health. You have to stay with seed health if we're going to have a healthy environment. Same thing in the economic sphere. We have to keep seeding things. We have to keep creating good soil. So, you know, I keep taking those risks. I keep looking for those things. I keep looking for the new ventures that are happening. There's a lot of stuff happening now with organizations making it available to local people. I can go in as a social impact investor and create a support for them, and I'll get some return. But then they will actually have local people invest, and they will take less risk than I will. So it's wonderful. We're now getting local people to invest locally. We're getting philanthropic dollars to help take more risk. And I can come in and take more risk and yet enable it so that the people locally can also invest.
And speaking of the grassroots, your experience is unique because, as you mentioned, you started at a grassroots level, you've worked at a grassroots level, and you've also worked at the fund level. Mm-hmm. For example, you spent 3 years managing a craft cooperative in Kentucky at the grassroots level, and you've worked in several funds. You mentioned the Institute for Community Economics, which created some of the first land trusts. You've viewed community development from different vantage points, both on the ground and from a bird's eye level. When you think about that unique perspective from having been both on the ground and at a high level, what have you learned?
Well, one of the things I say to people is it's about relationships. And, you know, if you invest in a CDFI, you may not have the relationships with the local community, but be sure that CDFI has those relationships. Because for me, it's always been, whenever I review a loan and I'm working on, quote, underwriting it, because I've done a lot of that, but I always have conversations with people. It's the conversation that says to me, you've thought this through. If you run, you know, in the early days, people didn't even know how to do a business plan, so I was kind of even coaching them on how to do a business plan. But I would say to them, if this plan doesn't work, this is a great idea, but if this doesn't work, what will you do? And you know what I was listening for? Perseverance. That conflict and problems don't deter them. They have such a passion for what they're trying to do, and they have the support of the community. This is not just them. You know, there's only so far you can go with entrepreneurship. Not everybody's an entrepreneur, let's face it. I ran an entrepreneurship fund for low-income women, you know, and the first thing they would say when they'd come in for the training was, well, I want to create jobs for other people. And we'd have to say to them, no, if you own the company, this is your third child. This is 24/7. And if you hire people, it's even more 24/7 for you. So entrepreneurship is not for everybody. It is not the magic pill that people make it out to be. So I was always listening for, do you have community support? Do you have people behind you? Will you not run at the first sign of conflict or problems or issues? Because if you stay committed, I'll walk with you. I will stay committed to you. I'm not a bank. I'm not going to pull. I'm going to stay with you until we make this a success. And that's why I like working with the grassroots. It's about relationships. And that's really what economics means, right? Oiko Credit. Oiko comes from the original word for the economy, meaning household. We're all in the household. And if one suffers, we all suffer. So to me, that is really key to keeping our economy relationship-based. And keeping it relationship-based not just with people, but our environment. That's what our environmentalists are telling us. You know, you cannot just use the resources of Earth. We have a relationship with Earth. I say to people, if you're financially astute, you know what derivatives are. Well, guess what? We're a major derivative. If the Earth goes, it's over for us. I don't care what they try to say about Mars or anything. This is what we are derived from. We are made of Earth. This is important to us. And so its health, and I'm investing in a lot of things for soil health, etc., because this health is so important for us. And if I can mention a resource, I suggest to everybody that you read David Corton's book, Change the Story, Change the Future. Because the reality is, for faith-based investors, he starts with the three sacred stories, the Abrahamic traditions, Jewish, Catholic, or Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. And he talks about how our sacred stories were how cultures grew and how we knew how we should treat each other, etc. And then he shows, and he's an economist, how, at least in the US, capitalism and advertising have co-opted the moral story. And they're starting to tell us how we should relate to each other. And it's all about money. And he says we have to go back to those original stories if we're really going to claim the earth and peoples. And so that's what I'm saying to people is when you get involved in community investing, this is not about Wall Street and return, etc. This is about relationships. Get involved with your local CDFI. Get involved with a local credit union. Do your banking through a credit union instead of through a big bank. Think of the people you'd be helping.
Right, absolutely. And I'm happy you mentioned David Corton, who happens to live here on Bainbridge Island, as I do, just outside of Seattle. Speaking of resilience and persistence, 13 years ago, you founded the Religious Communities Investment Fund, which today pools and invests the community development funds of 35 Catholic congregations of religious women. How did the idea for this fund first occur to you? And what do you see as the most meaningful impact it's had so far?
Well, it didn't occur to me. What happened was that I was coordinating the ICCR coalition in California. It was called JOLT. And we got, many of the religious congregations came together to talk about what were we going to do with shareholder advocacy, what were we going to do with filing resolutions, what about voting proxies. We talked about all of that. And because of my experience in community investing, some of the smaller communities were like, gee, we can only do like 10,000, maybe 25. And for the groups, that wasn't enough to go through all the paperwork and everything. So we started to collaborate, and I would find a quote deal, and we would talk about it at the meeting, and people would say, I can do, I can do, I can do. And one of the congregations would be the fiscal agent. So they'd all pool their money and make one loan to this group. And then that fiscal agent, you know, the group would just pay them. They'd only have to pay one group, and then they'd divvy it up to everybody. And so we were having great success with this. Well, a treasurer came to me and said, we love this ministry, but our sisters are aging, and I can't even find anybody to be on a committee anymore to help make the decisions. And as the treasurer, I don't want to do this alone. What can we do? That's where the idea came from. So we took it to the coalition and we said, what do you think? And people were like, wow, that's got some possibilities because, again, a number of these were small congregations. So we had a task force. It took us 2 years. We kept coming back to the coalition saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What about this model, etc.? And that's where we came up with the model for our CIF. And we incorporated in 2008. And we said to the members, we did a feasibility study and we said we need 3 million to stay self-sufficient, because we knew these were also communities that would not have a lot of donation money. And they saw this as, gee, I don't have to pay staff, I don't have to pay for a committee, so I'll gladly give it to you at 0%, because now I don't have those costs. And at 0%, then we could be self-sufficient. Within a year, we found that we were not an accredited investor, even though all the congregations were. So we went back to the members and said, we have to be 5 million to be an accredited investor. So again, many of them gave us enough money. We reached the $5 million mark, and then we were off and running. And in those early years, I mean, I did everything, and I was doing it part-time, but, I had little bits of money, So, and I got it out the door as soon as I could get it in. And so over the years, we kept going to the Religious Treasurers National Conference and marketing and inviting others to join us. So little by little, we kept getting more and more communities, because they realized that, again, more and more people were facing, I don't have the ability to have a committee, and we want to keep doing this. So it's provided that service where we can continue. And I said to people, we will be as prophetic and as efficient and effective as when it was lodged in your congregation. So committed to constantly looking for those grassroots organizations, those risk-taking ventures that the sisters would have done if they were doing it themselves. And that's the whole philosophy behind it. And now it's grown to 35 congregations, because more and more congregations are saying, this is perfect. We don't have to deal with all the monitoring and the blah, blah, blah. Go for it. And so more and more have joined. Now my own congregation has put money into it, but we're still big enough that we have our own fund as well. And I like to still have some of the congregations. There are about 5 of us that have formed a group. We call ourselves the WFBI, Women in Faith-Based Investing. And we give each other deals, etc. But when you find something that's good, I now have other people to say, hey, invest in this. Whereas if we were in just one fund, you'd be limited by how much you could invest. Well, this way I can leverage lots of other people to invest. So I'm still running the Adrian Fund. We have a new director for our CIF, Sarah Geisler, who's great. And Mercy Sisters have a fund, the Cabrini Impact Fund, Seton Endowment, Adrian's. We're still, and there are other communities who are also doing their own investing. We're not the only ones. Plus the Catholic hospitals. The sisters never just did it themselves. They also got the Catholic hospitals involved. And they do large investing. And as a matter of fact, they have now created a network so that not besides Catholic hospitals, you get some of the for-profit hospitals like Henry Ford, Kaiser, Sutter, doing this kind of investing for housing, clinics, that kind of thing they tend to do.
Annie Donovan, who's the chief operating officer at the Local Initiative Support Coalition, I've mentioned this several times, but she, I believe, may have been the one who called you the godmother of CDFIs. And among other things, she credits you with inspiring her to empower people in communities. She said that you are still, quote, still doing work that's on the edge, and you have, quote, a spidey sense for the new and emerging and who's going to succeed. If Corinne Florek is there, I'm interested. And she lives rooted in her values and has been consistently faithful to them over a lifetime. She is an anchor. Realizing, Sister Corinne, that your work has inspired others, how do you hope the next generation of values-driven leaders will take CDFIs and community financing to the next level?
Well, number one, I'm glad a lot of them are working in CDFIs. Although I do challenge CDFIs to stop getting too corporate or too much like banks. But there's a lot of energy, at least in the Catholic community, there's a lot of energy around creating a shared economy. And I'm very excited about this as young people looking at doing more cooperatives, doing more structures that find ways to involve community, etc. And of course, it's based, and Pope Francis has become a great advocate for this kind of investing. So I feel like, we now have some. I mean, I worked for the Catholic Campaign for Human Development to do this kind of investing, so we've always had some of the Catholic institutional church support behind it, but to have Pope Francis advocating this is wonderful for our particular denomination. So I'm watching these younger people really taking on this shared economy, the Francesco economy, to look at internationally and structurally, what do we need to change? And so they can amplify, how is this really affecting workers? How is this really affecting the environment? How is this really getting into neighborhoods that are still disinvested in? How do we make reparations for redlining? Even though that was outlawed, we still have the effects of that. So that's what I take hope in, is these new efforts at creating this, let's look at changing the economy. You get some groups like Seed Commons, which is saying, as an investor, the people who are going to decide who gets this money are the people who are part of this Seed Commons. And they're running organizations, and they will also help other organizations. You're not going to make the decisions. We will make the decisions. Again, cooperation among cooperatives. And as an investor, we will only make money if they make money. And you will only get a percent. It's not going to be, like a loan. You're not going to get a defined return. But you will share in our success and our losses with us. So it's a little more risky, but for many of us, that's okay. That's okay. It's kind of a royalty-based kind of system. So there are new structures being developed like this, which get me very excited. Another one that I got very excited about is it's called the Real People's Fund in Oakland, California. It is 6 community organizations, African American, Latino, Asian, etc., coming together to fund small businesses in their neighborhoods. They created a financial stack, philanthropic, mission aligned, which would be groups like myself, and then the community, who can eventually invest as well in businesses in their communities. Now, this is a grassroots effort. It's using grassroots organizations. It's using grassroots people to help make the decisions. But the other beautiful thing is they're not having to create all the infrastructure. They're using community vision, a local CDFI, to do all the accounting work, all the financial, investors invest and make sure you get paid and the business pays back, all that kind of stuff. So they just pay them a fee. They don't have to create all that infrastructure. They're using 2 local groups, Runway and Ujima Cooperative, to work with the entrepreneurs or the small business owners to understand how to run their business, to better do their marketing, all those kind of things, because people need advice. They need lots of advice. Ask any small business lender. Small business owners need lots of advice. So they've got 2 organizations. So what they've done is they've created a financial model, and they will pay for these services, but that's a lot cheaper than trying to start up all that infrastructure again. And I've been saying that for years. Let's stop making every little grassroots group have all this infrastructure. Let's collaborate. Let's network. So I'm starting to see this, and that just thrills my heart.
I hear you. Mine as well. And before we're almost out of time, I want to make sure you at least have 30 seconds. I understand you've got a book coming out. What's the title of your book, and when can we expect it?
Oh, I'm so glad you reminded me, Matt. Yes, I am working with 2 co-authors, Gail DeGeorge and Sarah Watson, and we're writing a book called Investing for Justice, the Pioneering Efforts of Catholic Sisters. Because so few people know our story. They think this just started when Wall Street got hip to it. I'm like, 1970, 2008, we made our first investment. You realize that's 45 years ago. I mean, more than that now. We've been at this a long time, and we have created the things that you now can invest in. We were some of those first investors in one of the models, and that story has to get out there. So we're working on it. It's a work in progress. It'll probably take us a couple years because we want to do it well. We're also going to talk about the work we did with shareholders, because a lot of that work is part of challenging the economy. So we're very excited about it. So stay tuned, but please think about it. Keep remembering us, because it might take us a couple of years to get all this, because we're trying to get all these stories, and we have so many stories. So I think you'll enjoy it once we write it, but right now we're still in the research phase.
Understood. Well, can't wait. Investing for Justice. We'll look for that coming out in the next couple of years, and we'll look forward to sharing news of that when it's available. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and to those of you who sent in questions. And thank you, Sister Corinne, for joining us in this series of interviews we're calling Alignment, Using Your Values to Invest in Social Change. Please join us at the same time on Wednesday, December 29th for our next interview in the Alignment series. Alignment is made possible by generous donations from people like you. You can also invest in Oiko Credit's impact through our recoverable grant program. To learn more about Oiko Credit US or how to support our mission to improve living standards in low-income countries, visit our website at oikocreditus.org. Until next time, on behalf of everyone at Oiko Credit US, thanks for your support. See you soon.